This was one of my best Nations Cup races. We were at Le Mans driving Group 1 cars in dynamic weather with full 90-day cycle that made the experience even more exciting. But what made this race truly special was everything that unfolded along the way. We were driving a very special car that had no limit on the battery recharge, even though the display showed 100% of the battery could actually charge, but it was far beyond that, even into a few thousand%. This meant it was possible to charge the battery for an entire lap before you actually do your qualifying lap. So basically, by going slower, applying the brakes and recharging consistently, I managed to build up an enormous amount of energy. And that's exactly what I was doing before the qualifying. And then when I started my flying lap and began deploying the battery, it was still discharging, but the display didn't show it. So the battery level stayed at the same, well, basically just the indicator stayed the same, even though it said it was discharging, but the icon didn't move. And this was like a little part of the glitch that gave everyone that used this car a huge advantage. So the players who took this car were in a much better position for the start of the race. But this car is a front-wheel drive car, so the front tires are not going to be in this best shape if it's kind of semi-dry conditions. So basically intermediates wear out much quicker. So it's kind of a downside of this car. And that's the reason why a lot of other players decided to take other cars for this race, because this car didn't really work well with the intermediates. And that's why, so it should have been either a full wet race or a full dry race. Nothing in between really works for this car, and it's a huge downside because the tires just cannot handle it. And then the conditions were quite unpredictable, and no one really knew whether to go for wets or just for the slicks. I mean, basically intermediates we're talking about here. But then I went for those medium tires, and I just wanted to keep an eye on the weather, and I thought it would stop raining and the track would eventually dry out. And that's exactly what happened. So the medium tires were a bit of a gamble, but I would avoid making a stop, which was a serious plus in this race. And then when we started the race, it was still slightly damp, but just good enough for those slicks. Whoa. There was one very little dive right there. Oh yeah, they will work together, I think. And in the race, you can see that it wasn't possible to build the same battery charge as in the qualifying. And that's where this setup didn't really work as well. But it still had some straight line speed that was quite competitive. And the battery performed better than with most of the other cars. But managing it properly was the key. So just before the braking point, you had to brake slightly earlier to recover some of the charge, then deploy it on the straight. The interesting part is that the battery deployed automatically. So it's not like we had some kind of a button to press and to control it. And I think this made battery management even more important. And on top of that, just avoiding penalties. That was also an important part. So in the first sector, I kept wondering how were they managing to carry so much more speed down the straights? I just couldn't understand it at first, but then when I watched the replay, I noticed that Valerio was charging his battery in a much more efficient way. So he started braking slightly earlier, but with just about, I would say 10-15% more than I did, because I did not activate the battery. So the battery recharge system does not activate until you reach, I believe it was 15 to 20%. And he was actually doing it in the much better way. And then when he got onto the straight, the battery deployed and he was much quicker. And you can clearly see the difference in the battery charge that he had. And I mean, this pretty much decided this whole race. But I was still in a good place in this race. I mean, P3 in this lobby is definitely not bad. But I thought, you know what, I just have to manage the battery. I just have to bring it home, and I just have to try to stay in the slipstream. And that's my goal. Staying in the slipstream, staying with them. But every little mistake that you do is multiplied by a factor of 20 in this one. And eventually, I just dropped out of the slipstream. And for me, that was the moment that actually decided this race. It's not like I was much slower than them or something amazing happened. No, it was just a tiny mistake or that tiny exit that I didn't perform in the right way. And unfortunately, I just couldn't charge the battery from that point, and it was gone. I mean, basically, they were gone. I messed it up
I think I need to straighten up the car and only then accelerate, otherwise I'm just wasting the battery.
That was another crucial part of this race. When you start accelerating and feel a slight vibration through the wheel, it means that the front tires are losing grip. And once that happens, you're just wasting battery on something that is not efficient, since the tires are basically spinning instead of putting the energy down properly and getting the acceleration you want. So in these conditions, and I believe in this environment, that kind of wheel spin is definitely something that you want to avoid. And at that point, there were a few cars behind me, and I was the one breaking the air for them. That gave them a slight advantage on the straights, as they could use the slipstream to close the gap. I tried to push and manage the battery as best I possibly could, but they were gaining, and they were closing in quickly. At Le Mans, there is not much that you can do to defend when something like that happens because, of course, of the long straights. You can just only slightly change your lines or position the car in a different place, but that's about it. And I guess over time, you just know that it's going to get there. And it's pretty much only a matter of time when are they going to go for an overtake. Overall, I think he just had a little bit more pace than I did, but he was pushing. Even in this part of the lap where I was just trying to close the gap, he was still gaining, and I was slowly losing time to him. It wasn't because of a big mistake, just small moments where I went slightly off the ideal line, and suddenly that tiny difference made a huge impact. I think the next moment really explains how you can, well, eventually make a tiny mistake, and all of a sudden, we are right back in it. Overall, this is exactly the moment that saved me. He made a small mistake, and just as we got onto the straight, this was all that I needed to follow him closely and recharge the battery in the proper way. And you can see me that I didn't even want to go for that overtake straight away, even though I was much closer than I wanted to be. So I started braking a little bit earlier, focusing on setting myself up for the next straight and eventually waiting for the right time to attack. And at that point, it became a matter of strategy, preparing for that final moment and time to attack. Just by braking a little bit sooner and managing the battery well, I was setting everything up perfectly. Then, just when it looked like we were about to have a pretty nice battle for P3, everything suddenly went downhill. But for him.
I think we have trouble behind. If we start battling now, it won't go well for us. And yeah. This is the reason why I brake earlier.
And yes, this is exactly why I brake earlier. Something similar happened to me during practice, and I realized that you just can't go flat out through there. At least not with that much steering angle. You can try, but it's quite risky. And unfortunately, he lost control. And that was the end of his race. And after that, I suddenly had a whole group of drivers right behind me, all ready to take my spot. And from that moment on, it was all about defending as best I possibly could and really trying to keep my position.
Yeah, but now I have no... Yeah, I wanted to say I have no slipstream now, which is not good in a situation like this.
It's definitely not easy, but with just 2 laps to go, I knew I would probably lose a position sooner or later. And at the same time, I didn't want to fight too hard and risk losing even more time. So the strategy was simple. Stay behind Lev, save the battery, and wait for the perfect moment to make a move in the final lap. And unfortunately, by this point, there were just too many drivers involved in the battle. It made things a lot more exciting, but also a lot more challenging for me.
Yeah, they can't do much. And he also has a penalty.
And I believe that penalty saved me for another lap. He had to serve a penalty, and with his car and the position where he was, it was really difficult to get back into the fight. And then I was right on the back of Lev. I really wanted to make the most out of this race, and managing this situation is definitely not easy. So my car has the advantage on the straights, while their cars were slightly better in the corners. And going into the final lap, I was sitting perfectly behind Lev in his slipstream. And just to improve my odds, I finally decided to go for it.
Thought about it. Yeah, I can't do anything here on the straight. If he has the speed, he has the speed.
And this is where I really started planning my next move, and actually my final move. I knew it would all come down to the battery management, and I needed to just get a little bit more charge. So I decided to brake slightly earlier behind them to recover more energy and prepare for that final push. I knew it was a risky move, but at that point, I just had to try. After that, I positioned the car exactly where I wanted it to be, right on the inside of the corner, denying him of the slipstream that he needed. It was probably my best defensive move of this whole race. He had no time to react or recover from that, and I think that was a fairly solid positioning. While the other two drivers were battling each other, I managed to keep my line, stay focused, and bring it home in P3 in this very, very competitive lobby.
Not like before. This time, I'm going to do it well. P3.
I have to say it, this was one of the best races that I've ever done. But to be fair, I had a pretty strong car, but I really made the most out of it. In the end, I scored 364 points, which moved me up to P4 in the region. A fairly solid result, I would say. And if you enjoyed this content and if you would like to see more of it, please hit the like button or potentially even subscribe to the channel. Guys, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.